The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the trading post in Custer, Montana territory, and Yates Kendrick knew something was wrong the moment he saw the driver's face go pale as milk. "She needs help," the driver called out, jumping down from his perch with unusual urgency. "Been burning up with fever since we left Helena. I thought she'd make it through, but she's barely conscious now." Yates set down the fence post he'd been carrying and wiped the sweat from his brow. The summer of 1882 had been particularly brutal, with temperatures soaring well into the 90s most afternoons. He approached the coach just as the driver opened the door, revealing a young woman slumped against the wooden seat, her face flushed crimson and her dark hair plastered to her forehead with perspiration. "Miss." Yates reached in carefully, noting how she trembled despite the oppressive heat. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She wore a traveling dress that had once been a respectable gray but was now wrinkled and stained with dust from the long journey. A small carpet bag sat at her feet, apparently her only possession. Anyone expecting her in town? Yates asked the driver. The older man shook his head. "She paid her fare in Helena, said she was looking for work out here. Teaching, I think she mentioned. That was 3 days ago. She started feeling poorly yesterday morning and it's just gotten worse." Yates didn't hesitate. He reached into the coach and carefully lifted the woman into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, and up close he could feel the alarming heat radiating from her skin. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he heard her mumble something incoherent. "I'll take her to my place," Yates said firmly. "It's just up the road and Doc Wilson won't be back from Billings until next week." The driver looked relieved. "You sure about that? You don't know nothing about her?" "I know she needs help and that's enough." Yates adjusted his hold on the woman and nodded toward her bag. "Bring that along, would you?" His ranch was a modest spread about 2 miles from the center of Custer, set back against the foothills where cottonwoods provided some shade and a creek ran year-round. Yates had built the cabin himself 5 years ago when he was just 20 years old, determined to make something of the land his father had claimed before dying of pneumonia. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a covered porch, but it was sturdy and well-maintained. The driver helped carry the woman inside, setting her bag by the door before tipping his hat. "I'll check back in a few days if I'm through this way again. Good luck to you both." Yates barely heard him leave. He was already carrying the woman to his own bed, the only proper one in the house, and laying her down as gently as he could. In the better light filtering through the window, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably around his own age of 25. Even in her fevered state, he could see she had delicate features and long lashes that cast shadows on her flushed cheeks. He fetched cool water from the well and tore up one of his spare shirts to make cloths. For the next several hours, he worked steadily, bathing her face and arms with the cool water, trying to bring down the fever. She tossed and turned, sometimes crying out in delirium, sometimes falling into an ominous silence that scared him more than the thrashing. "Please," she whispered once, her eyes opening but unfocused. "Please, I have to get there, I promised." "You're safe now," Yates told her softly, pressing a fresh cloth to her forehead. "Just rest. Everything else can wait." As night fell, Yates lit a lantern and continued his vigil. He'd dealt with fever before, had nursed his father through several bouts of illness before the final one took him. He knew the next day or 2 would be critical. If the fever broke, she'd likely survive. If it didn't, well, he tried not to think about that possibility. Sometime around midnight, she began shaking so violently he feared she might hurt herself. He piled every blanket he owned on top of her. Then, when that wasn't enough, he carefully climbed onto the bed beside her and held her close, trying to warm her with his own body heat. It felt improper, holding a strange woman this way, but propriety seemed less important than keeping her alive. "It's all right," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "You're going to be all right." The chills passed eventually, giving way to more fever. Yates dozed fitfully in the chair he'd pulled close to the bed, waking every hour or so to check on her and apply fresh, cool cloths. By morning, he was exhausted but determined. He made a thin broth from the chicken he'd been planning to cook for his own dinner and tried to get some of it into her. She swallowed a few spoonfuls before turning her head away. The second day followed much the same pattern as the first. Yates neglected his ranch work entirely, focusing all his attention on his patient. He talked to her sometimes, telling her about the ranch and the town, about the mountains he could see from his porch, and the way the creek sounded when it ran high in spring. He didn't know if she could hear him, but it seemed important to fill the silence. "My mother would have liked you," he found himself saying late that evening. "She always said this place needed a woman's touch. She died when I was 10, back in Illinois before we came west. Sometimes I still miss her voice." The woman's eyelids moved slightly, and he thought perhaps she was fighting to wake up. "You're going to make it," he told her firmly. "I don't even know your name yet, and you can't leave before I find that out." On the third morning, Yates woke with his head on the edge of the bed, his hand still holding the cloth he'd been using to cool her fever. Sunlight was streaming through the window, and for a moment he was disoriented. Then he felt movement and looked up to find the woman's eyes open and clear, looking directly at him. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse and weak, but it was rational. The fever had broken. Yates sat up quickly, relief flooding through him so intensely he felt momentarily dizzy. "You're at my ranch just outside Custer. You came in on the stage 3 days ago, sick with fever. I'm Yates Kendrick." She blinked slowly, taking in her surroundings. "I don't remember. The last thing I recall clearly was leaving Helena." She tried to sit up and immediately swayed. "Easy now," Yates said, gently pressing her back against the pillows. "You've been very ill. You need to take it slow." "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered. "You're a stranger, and yet you've obviously been caring for me. I can see it in your face how tired you are." "Anyone would have done the same." "I don't think that's true, but I appreciate you saying it." She managed a weak smile. "My name is Audrey Morgan. I came here to take a teaching position. At least, I hope the position is still available after I've missed arriving on time." "School doesn't start for another month," Yates assured her. "I'm sure the school board will understand when they hear what happened." Audrey closed her eyes briefly. "I must look terrible. You look alive, and that's what matters." Yates stood and moved to the small stove in the corner. "Let me make you some real food. You've had nothing but broth for 3 days." Over the next week, Audrey slowly regained her strength. Yates helped her to the chair on the porch where she could sit in the shade and breathe the fresh air. He made her eggs and bacon, biscuits with honey, and even attempted a pie with somewhat comical results that made her laugh for the first time. "You're a better nurse than you are a baker," she teased, poking at the burnt crust. "I never claimed to be good at either," Yates replied, but he was grinning. He loved the sound of her laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. As she recovered, they talked. Audrey told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a schoolteacher mother and a merchant father. "They both died last year," she explained, her voice quiet. "Yellow fever. After that, I couldn't bear to stay in the house where everything reminded me of them. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, it seemed like a sign." "That took courage," Yates said. "Coming all this way alone. Or foolishness?" She smiled sadly. "I'm not sure which. Courage," he said firmly. "And I'm glad you came." He told her about his own journey west, how his father had been lured by promises of free land and opportunity. "He taught me everything about ranching," Yates explained. "How to work with cattle, how to read the weather, how to survive out here. He died 5 years ago, and some days I still turn to ask him a question before I remember he's gone." "It's hard, isn't it?" Audrey said softly. "Losing the people who knew us best." "It is." Yates met her eyes and felt something shift in his chest. "But maybe we find new people who come to know us just as well." A blush colored her cheeks, and she looked away, but she was smiling. By the end of the second week, Audrey was well enough to insist on helping around the house. She proved to be an excellent cook, far better than Yates, and soon had the cabin organized in ways he'd never managed on his own. She washed curtains he'd forgotten he had and aired out blankets and turned his bachelor quarters into something that felt like a home. "You don't have to do all this," he protested, coming in one afternoon to find her scrubbing the floor. "You saved my life," she said simply. "This is the least I can do." But they both knew it was more than repayment. There was something growing between them, something neither of them quite knew how to name yet. Yates found himself looking forward to coming in from his work just to see her face. He caught himself watching the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way she hummed while she worked, the graceful movements of her hands. For her part, Audrey found herself studying Yates when he didn't notice. He was tall and lean, hardened by years of physical labor, but there was a gentleness in him that surprised her. The way he'd cared for her when she was helpless, the patience he showed with everything, the kindness in his eyes. She'd never met anyone quite like him. One evening, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The air had finally cooled, and a breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and wild grass. "I should probably go into town soon," Audrey said reluctantly. "I need to find the school board chairman and explain what happened, and I'll need to find a place to stay." "You can stay here as long as you need," Yates said quickly. "I mean, if that's proper, I can sleep in the barn." "You've been sleeping in the barn for 2 weeks already," Audrey pointed out. "I can't keep taking your bed." "I don't mind." They were quiet for a moment, then Audrey said softly, "Yates, what are we doing?" He knew what she meant. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want you to leave. I don't want to leave either." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "But I need to be practical. I need this job. I have no other means of supporting myself, and I can't impose on your generosity forever." "It's not generosity," Yates said. "Not anymore." He reached over and took her hand, his heart pounding. "Audrey, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt this way about anyone. When you were sick, I was terrified I'd lose you before I even had a chance to know you. And now that you're better, I realize I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Audrey's eyes widened. "Yates, I'm not asking for an answer right now," he continued. "I just needed you to know. However long you need to take the teaching position and get settled, I'll wait. But I hope that eventually you might consider staying here permanently, with me." She squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "It terrifies me how much I've come to care for you. I keep telling myself it's too fast, that it can't be real. But then I see you, and my heart knows differently." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Then we'll figure it out together." The next day, they rode into Custer together on Yates's wagon. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings housing a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a church, and various other businesses. People stopped to stare as Yates helped Audrey down from the wagon, and he could see the curiosity in their faces. The school board chairman, a stern-looking man named Howard Fletcher, kept an office above the general store. He looked surprised when they appeared in his doorway. "Mr. Fletcher," Audrey said politely. "My name is Audrey Morgan. I'm the teacher you hired from Boston." Fletcher's eyebrows rose. "Miss Morgan, we'd expected you weeks ago. We'd nearly given up on you." Audrey explained what had happened, and Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "Well, that's quite an ordeal, and Mr. Kendrick here nursed you through it. He saved my life," Audrey said firmly. "I wouldn't have survived without him." Fletcher studied them both, and Yates had the uncomfortable feeling the man was seeing more than they'd intended to show. "I see. Well, Miss Morgan, the position is still available if you want it. School starts in 3 weeks. We've arranged for you to board with Mrs. Patterson, the pastor's widow. She runs a respectable boarding house for single women." "Thank you," Audrey said. "I'm very grateful for the opportunity." They spent the rest of the day in town. Yates introduced Audrey to the shopkeepers and other townspeople, and she made arrangements to move into the boarding house the following week. Mrs. Patterson was a plump, kindly woman in her 50s who welcomed Audrey warmly and showed her the small but clean room that would be hers. "It's nice," Audrey said, looking around at the narrow bed, the small dresser, the washstand. Then she caught Yates's eye and they both looked away, knowing they were both thinking the same thing. This room felt nothing like the cabin they'd been sharing, the home they'd been building together. The week before Audrey moved to town passed too quickly. They made the most of every moment, taking long walks along the creek, sitting up late talking, learning everything they could about each other. Yates told her about his dreams for expanding the ranch, maybe running more cattle, building a bigger house someday. Audrey shared her love of teaching, her hopes of making a difference in children's lives. "My mother always said education was the key to everything," she explained. She believed every child deserved the chance to learn, regardless of their circumstances. "You'll be a wonderful teacher," Yates said with certainty. "The children here are lucky to have you." On Audrey's last night at the ranch before moving to town, they sat on the porch as had become their habit. The summer stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "I'm going to miss this," Audrey said softly. "Miss being here with you like this." "I'll visit," Yates promised. "Often, and you'll come back here on weekends if you want." "I do want." She turned to face him. "Yates, I need to tell you something. Before I left Boston, a man asked me to marry him, a perfectly respectable banker's son. My friends thought I was crazy to turn him down, especially after I'd lost my parents and had no real security. But I didn't love him, and I couldn't imagine spending my life with someone I didn't love." Yates waited, not sure where she was going with this. "What I'm trying to say is that I know what it feels like to be with someone and feel nothing," Audrey continued. "And I know how different it is with you. With you, I feel everything. You make me laugh, and you make me feel safe, and you make me want to be brave enough to believe in happiness again." "Audrey," Yates breathed her name like a prayer. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you," Yates said. "I know it's soon, but it's true." "I love you too," Audrey whispered back. "I think I started falling in love with you when I first woke up and saw how exhausted you were from taking care of me, and I've just kept falling ever since." They kissed again, and the future suddenly seemed full of golden possibilities. The next day, Yates helped Audrey move into the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson fussed over her new boarder, making sure she had everything she needed. Audrey would take her meals downstairs with the other residents, 3 other single women who worked in town as a seamstress, a clerk at the general store, and a nurse. Saying goodbye was harder than Yates had anticipated. Standing on the boarding house porch with Mrs. Patterson watching from the window, he couldn't even kiss Audrey properly, settling for squeezing her hand. "I'll see you Sunday," he said. "I'll come to church and then we can have lunch." "I'll count the hours," Audrey replied, and he could see she meant it. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. Yates came to town twice a week, sitting with Audrey in the boarding house parlor under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye, or taking her for carefully chaperoned walks through town. On Sundays, they sat together in church, and Yates noticed how the other townspeople watched them, how the whispers followed them. He didn't care. Let them talk. Audrey threw herself into preparing for the school year. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, with rough benches for the students and a pot-belly stove for heat in winter. She spent hours organizing supplies, planning lessons, making the space welcoming. "I'm nervous," she admitted to Yates one afternoon as they walked past the school. "What if I'm not good enough? What if the parents don't like my teaching methods?" "You'll be wonderful," Yates assured her. "You care about the children already and they haven't even arrived yet. That's what makes a good teacher." The first day of school arrived. Yates found excuses to come to town that day, wanting to be nearby in case Audrey needed support. He didn't intrude, but he was pleased when she came to find him at the general store after school let out, her face flushed with excitement. "It was wonderful," she said breathlessly. "I have 18 students ranging from age 6 to 14. They're all so eager to learn, Yates. Even the older boys who I'd heard might be trouble, they were perfect gentlemen." "I told you," Yates said, grinning at her enthusiasm. "They're lucky to have you." As September turned to October and the leaves on the cottonwoods turned gold, Yates and Audrey's relationship deepened. They had to work within the constraints of propriety and Audrey's teaching position, which made their time together precious. But the restrictions also forced them to really talk, to build a foundation of friendship and understanding beneath the romance. Audrey met Yates's neighbors and friends, the other ranchers and their families who lived scattered across the valley. She was welcomed warmly, especially by the women who were clearly delighted to see Yates courting someone. "We'd given up hope he'd ever settle down," Mrs. Sarah Whitman confided to Audrey at a Sunday social. "He's been alone out there too long. You're good for him. Anyone can see how happy he is now." For his part, Yates attended school programs and community events, learning about Audrey's work and the children she taught. He was impressed by her dedication, the way she stayed late to help students who were struggling, how she used her own money to buy books and supplies the school board couldn't afford. One Saturday in late October, Yates took Audrey on a picnic up in the foothills where the aspens had turned brilliant yellow. They rode his horse together, Audrey sitting in front of him, comfortable in his arms. He'd packed a basket with fried chicken, biscuits, apples, and a jar of lemonade. They spread a blanket in a meadow overlooking the valley and Audrey gasped at the view. "It's beautiful," she said. "You can see for miles." "This is where I want to build our house someday," Yates said. Then he caught himself. "I mean, I hope, if you'd want to." "I'm sorry I'm getting ahead of myself." But Audrey was smiling. "Our house," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They ate lunch and talked about the future. Yates had been thinking about it constantly. "I know we haven't been courting very long," he said carefully. "But I also know what I want. I want to marry you, Audrey. I want to build that house and fill it with children and grow old with you. I'm just trying to be patient and do this properly." Audrey reached over and took his hand. "What if I don't want you to be patient?" His heart skipped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I know what I want too, and I don't see the point in waiting when we're both certain." She took a deep breath. "Yates Kendrick, if you were to ask me to marry you right now, I would say yes." Yates didn't need to be told twice. He got down on one knee right there in the meadow, still holding her hand. Audrey Morgan, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of those children we'll fill our house with? Yes, Audrey said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it felt like every good thing he'd ever hoped for was suddenly coming true. They rode back to town in a happy daze, already making plans. They'd have to wait a bit, of course, for propriety's sake. Audrey would need to finish out the school term, or at least get far enough into it that the board could find a replacement if necessary. And there were preparations to make, people to tell, a wedding to plan. Mrs. Patterson was delighted when they told her the news, and any concerns she might have had about the speed of the courtship seemed to evaporate in the face of their obvious happiness. I knew it the first time I saw you two together, she said, beaming. You're meant for each other. The town of Custer received the news with general approval. A few of the older gossips clucked about how quickly it was all happening, but most people were genuinely happy for the young couple. The pastor, Reverend Charles Harrison, agreed to perform the ceremony and suggested a December wedding, which would give them 3 months to prepare. That seems reasonable, he said kindly. It will allow time for bands to be posted and for proper preparations. And a Christmas wedding can be quite lovely. Audrey continued teaching while planning the wedding, and Yates worked harder than ever on the ranch, wanting to make sure everything was in good order before he became a married man. He started making improvements to the cabin, adding shelves and hooks, fixing anything that was loose or worn, building proper furniture to replace the rough pieces he'd cobbled together over the years. On weekends, Audrey came out to the ranch and helped him plan where things would go, what changes they might make in the future. They decided to keep the cabin as their home for the first few years while they saved money, then eventually build that bigger house up in the meadow. I don't need anything fancy, Audrey assured him. I just need you. You'll have both, Yates promised. I'll give you everything I can. November arrived with the first real cold, and with it came a challenge neither of them had anticipated. The school board chairman, Howard Fletcher, called Audrey into his office one afternoon after school. Miss Morgan, he said, his expression stern, I'm afraid we have a problem. It's come to my attention that you're engaged to be married. Yes, sir, Audrey said, puzzled. I didn't think it was a secret. It's not the engagement itself that's the issue, Fletcher said. It's our policy. The school board has a rule that teachers must be unmarried. Once you marry Mr. Kendrick, you'll no longer be eligible for the position. Audrey felt as if she'd been slapped. But sir, surely that rule is meant to prevent teachers from being distracted or neglecting their duties. I assure you, I would never do that. It's not about your performance, which has been excellent, Fletcher said, and he did sound genuinely regretful. It's simply the policy. Married women are expected to focus on their homes and families, not work outside the home. I'm sorry, but you'll need to resign your position effective the date of your wedding. Audrey left the meeting feeling shaken. She'd known, abstractly, that many schools had such policies, but she'd somehow assumed it wouldn't apply to her. She loved teaching. It was part of who she was, and the income, while modest, provided her with independence and security. She didn't want to tell Yates at first, afraid he'd think she was regretting their engagement. But that evening, sitting in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, she found herself pouring out the whole story. I feel so foolish, she said, wiping at her eyes. I should have known. I should have asked about the policy before accepting the engagement. Now what do? I don't want to give up teaching, but I don't want to lose you either. Yates took both her hands in his. Audrey, listen to me. If teaching is that important to you, we'll figure something out. Maybe we delay the wedding until the end of the school year so you can finish. Or maybe we fight the school board on this policy. It's not right that women have to choose between marriage and working. Fighting would take time we don't have, Audrey said practically. And I don't want to delay the wedding. I want to marry you, Yates. I want to start our life together. She took a shaky breath. I suppose I'll just have to accept that my teaching career is over. Maybe not over, Yates said thoughtfully. Just changing. What if you taught children privately? Ranch families out in the valley struggle to get their children to school regularly, especially in winter. You could offer lessons at our place or travel to theirs. It wouldn't be the same as having your own schoolroom, but it would still be teaching. Audrey considered this. That could work. It would actually fill a real need. Some of the sadness lifted from her face. Trust you to find a solution. We're partners, Yates said simply. We solve problems together. The next few weeks were busy ones. Audrey submitted her resignation to the school board, effective December 20th, the day after the term ended for Christmas holiday. Fletcher accepted it with regret and immediately began advertising for her replacement to start in January. Meanwhile, Audrey quietly spread word that she'd be available for private tutoring after her marriage, and was pleased when several ranch families immediately expressed interest. The wedding preparations continued. Audrey's dress was being sewn by the town seamstress, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored wool, practical for a winter wedding. Mrs. Patterson and the other ladies at the boarding house were planning a small reception to be held at the church hall after the ceremony. Yates arranged to have his best friend from a neighboring ranch, Thomas Webb, stand up with him, while Audrey asked one of her fellow boarders, a sweet young woman named Clara, to be her attendant. As December approached, the weather turned colder and snow began to fall in the mountains. Audrey finished her last day of teaching on December 19th with a classroom full of students who presented her with drawings and small handmade gifts. Several of the mothers came to thank her for her dedication and to wish her well in her marriage. "You've made such a difference to our children," one mother said tearfully. "My son was struggling so much with reading, and you stayed late day after day to help him. Now he reads to his little brother every night." "It was my pleasure," Audrey said, meaning it. "That's why I became a teacher." That evening, Yates came to collect her from the boarding house for the last time. Tomorrow they would be married, and tomorrow night she would sleep at the ranch as his wife. It felt momentous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Nervous?" he asked as they sat in the parlor, Mrs. Patterson having given them some rare privacy. "A little," Audrey admitted. "Not about marrying you, I'm certain about that, just about all the changes. Everything is happening so fast." "I know." Yates squeezed her hand. "But we'll figure it out together. That's what marriage is, right? Figuring things out together." "I love you," Audrey said softly. "Thank you for being so patient with me, for understanding about the teaching, for everything." "I love you too," Yates replied. "And tomorrow can't come fast enough." The wedding day dawned cold but clear, the sun bright on the snow that had fallen overnight. Audrey dressed with help from Clara and Mrs. Patterson, her hands shaking slightly as they fastened the buttons on her dress. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping back to admire her work. "Absolutely beautiful." The church was small but packed with well-wishers. It seemed half the town had turned out for the wedding, along with ranch families from miles around. Audrey walked down the aisle on the arm of Howard Fletcher, who'd agreed to give her away in the absence of her father. Her eyes found Yates standing at the altar, looking handsome in his best suit, and suddenly all her nervousness disappeared. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. Reverend Harrison performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, speaking about love and partnership and the journey ahead. When it came time for the vows, Audrey and Yates spoke them clearly, their voices strong and certain. "I, Yates, take you, Audrey, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as we both shall live. I, Audrey, take you, Yates, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as we both shall live." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Audrey with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. They walked back down the aisle together, married, ready to face whatever came next as a team. The reception was festive despite the simple fare. There was cake and coffee, music from a fiddle player, even some dancing. Yates and Audrey moved through it all in a happy blur, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Finally, as the winter sun began to set, they climbed into Yates's wagon for the ride back to the ranch. Someone had tied old boots and cans to the back, which rattled merrily as they drove. Audrey leaned against her husband, still marveling at the word, and felt perfectly content. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kendrick," Yates said as he helped her down from the wagon. "It feels like I've been coming home to you since the day I arrived sick on that stage," Audrey replied. "You've been my home all along, Yates. The place doesn't matter." "But this place will be ours," Yates said. "We'll make it into everything we want it to be." That first night as husband and wife was everything it should be, tender and passionate and full of love. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms, Audrey felt a peace she hadn't known since before her parents died. She was no longer alone in the world. She had a partner, a love, a home. The winter passed in quiet happiness. Audrey settled into the rhythms of ranch life, learning to cook on the temperamental stove, to manage the household, to help Yates with lighter tasks around the property. She also began her private tutoring, taking on 6 students from neighboring ranches. Twice a week, families would bring their children to the Kendrick Ranch for lessons, and Audrey would teach them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography at the big table Yates had built specifically for this purpose. "You're a natural at this," Yates observed one afternoon, watching her patiently explain long division to a struggling 10-year-old boy. "These children are learning more from you in twice-weekly lessons than they would in daily classes with a less dedicated teacher." "I hope so," Audrey said. "I want to make a difference. You already are." Spring came, bringing warmer weather and new life to the ranch. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and wildflowers dotted the meadows. Yates worked long days preparing for the cattle drive, and Audrey helped where she could while continuing her teaching. One morning in May, Audrey woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before being sick, and when she came back in, pale and shaking, Yates was alarmed. "Maybe it was something you ate," he suggested, helping her back to bed. But when the same thing happened the next morning and the morning after that, Audrey began to suspect the truth. She confirmed it with Mrs. Patterson, who'd had 6 children of her own and recognized the signs immediately. "You're expecting, dear," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Probably about 2 months along, if I had to guess." Audrey told Yates that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that spread across his face was something she'd remember forever. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. Mrs. Patterson thinks the baby will come in November or December." "A baby," Yates breathed. "Our baby." "Audrey, I can't believe it. I'm going to be a father." "You'll be a wonderful father," Audrey assured him. "You're already wonderful at everything else." The pregnancy progressed normally. Audrey continued teaching through the summer. though she had to cut back her schedule as she grew larger and more tired. The ranch wives were full of advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offers to help. Yates became almost comically protective, worrying if Audrey so much as lifted a pot. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she finally told him, exasperated but touched. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "But you're my wife," Yates said. "And I remember how sick you were when we first met. I can't help but worry." "This is different," Audrey said, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly. "Feel that? That's our baby moving. Everything is fine." In October, they received a letter that had taken months to reach them. It was from a distant cousin of Audrey's father in Boston, responding to a letter Audrey had sent months earlier announcing her marriage. The cousin wrote that she'd been going through the family papers and found something that belonged to Audrey. "It's a small sum your mother set aside," the letter explained. "About $300. She'd saved it from her teaching salary over the years, intending it as a wedding gift for you someday. I'm arranging to have it transferred to a bank in Helena where you can collect it." Audrey read the letter aloud to Yates with tears streaming down her face. "My mother," she whispered. "Even now, she's still taking care of me." "We'll use it to start the new house," Yates decided. "It's time. The baby will be here soon and we're going to need more room." They began construction on the new house in early November, with help from neighbors who came for a raising bee. The house would be built on the meadow overlooking the valley, just as they'd planned on that autumn picnic that now seemed so long ago. It would have 4 rooms downstairs and 2 rooms upstairs under the eaves, with a proper kitchen and a stone fireplace. "We'll be in before spring," Yates promised Audrey as she stood watching the work, one hand on her very pregnant belly. "You and the baby will have a proper home." On December 10th, 1883, exactly 1 year after Audrey had first arrived sick with fever on the stage, she went into labor. It was evening and snow was falling softly outside. Yates immediately sent for Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women experienced in midwifery, then spent the next 12 hours pacing anxiously while Audrey labored in their bedroom. "First babies take time," Mrs. Patterson told him, shooing him out of the room for the 4th time. "Stop hovering and let us work." Finally, just after dawn, Yates heard the sound he'd been waiting for, the cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Patterson emerged a few minutes later, beaming. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy baby boy, and your wife came through beautifully." Yates rushed into the room. Audrey was propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was like the sun coming out. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates approached almost reverently. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. He was perfect. "He's beautiful," Yates whispered. "You're both beautiful. Audrey, I love you so much." "I love you too." She shifted the baby slightly. "Do you want to hold him?" Yates carefully took his son, cradling him awkwardly but tenderly. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and dark blue, and Yates felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "We never decided on a name," Audrey said. They'd discussed it but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Yates said, "What about William? It was my father's name. William Henry Kendrick." "William," Audrey repeated, testing it. "I like it. William Henry Kendrick. Welcome to the world, little one." The days after William's birth were a blur of feeding and diaper changes and sleepless nights, but also profound joy. Yates was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with William when he cried, changing him without complaint, doing whatever he could to help Audrey as she recovered. "You're a natural," Audrey told him one night as she watched him gently rock William back to sleep. "I'm terrified I'll break him," Yates admitted. He's so small. You won't break him. You're doing everything right." By spring, Audrey had recovered fully and William was thriving, growing plump and alert. The new house was finished enough that they could move in, though there was still interior work to be done. Audrey walked through the rooms, delighted with the extra space, the real windows with glass panes, the kitchen that was twice the size of the one in the cabin. "It's perfect," she declared. "Everything I could have wanted." They settled into life in the new house. Audrey resumed her tutoring, now teaching in the large front room that served as both parlor and schoolroom. Her students adored baby William, who would often nap in a basket in the corner during lessons. The ranch prospered. With hard work and careful management, Yates was able to expand his herd. He hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, giving him more time to spend with his family. Summer came again, hot and golden. On the anniversary of the day they'd met, Yates surprised Audrey with a picnic in the meadow where he'd proposed. They brought William, now 6 months old and full of smiles and baby babble. "Do you remember this day 2 years ago?" Yates asked as they sat on a blanket, watching William grab at grass with fascination. "Of course," Audrey said. "I was delirious with fever, barely conscious, and you were a stranger taking an enormous risk by caring for me." "Best risk I ever took," Yates said. He pulled her close, William between them. "Look at what we've built, Audrey. A home, a family, a life. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "It's real," Audrey assured him. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their son discover the world, "and it's only going to get better." She was right. As the years passed, their life together deepened and grew richer. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret in 1885 and another son named James in 1888. The house that had seemed so spacious filled with noise and laughter and the happy chaos of family life. Audrey continued teaching, becoming known throughout the region for her skill and dedication. Parents would travel significant distances to bring their children to her, knowing their sons and daughters would receive an excellent education. She took particular pride in teaching the ranch children, who might otherwise have gone without schooling entirely. Yates's ranch became one of the most successful in the valley. He was known as fair and honest, a man whose word could be trusted. He served on the town council and helped establish a proper school building in Custer, though Audrey continued to prefer teaching privately where she could set her own methods and curriculum. Through everything, through hard seasons and good ones, through the everyday struggles and triumphs of raising children and building a life, Yates and Audrey's love remained the foundation. They made it a point to sit together on the porch every evening after the children were in bed, talking over the day, making plans, simply being together. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked one such evening. They were in their late 30s now, married for over 15 years. "Leaving Boston, coming west, all of it." Audrey looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment, do you?" "Never." He took her hand, still feeling that spark he'd felt from the beginning. "You gave me everything I didn't know I needed, a partner, a family, a real home." "You saved my life," Audrey said softly. "In every way a person can be saved. I arrived here sick and alone and lost, and you gave me a reason to get well, a place to belong, a love I never dreamed I'd find." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their wedding, all the moments that had brought them to this place. Inside the house, they could hear the children getting ready for bed, William helping Margaret with her nightgown while James splashed in the wash basin. Tomorrow, Audrey had 3 students coming for lessons. Tomorrow, Yates needed to ride out to check the fence line in the north pasture. Tomorrow there would be meals to cook and chores to do and all the ordinary business of life. But tonight, there was just this. The two of them together, the family they'd created, the life they'd built from that single moment when a feverish young woman had arrived on a stagecoach and a young cowboy had decided to help a stranger. "I love you," Yates said, the words as true and necessary as they'd been the first time he'd said them. "I love you too," Audrey replied, "always and forever," and they did. As the years continued to pass, as their children grew and eventually started families of their own, as the Montana Territory became a state, and the new century approached, Yates and Audrey's love remained constant. They grew old together in the house on the meadow, surrounded by grandchildren, still holding hands, still finding joy in each other's company. William took over the ranch, having inherited his father's love of the land and skill with cattle. Margaret became a teacher like her mother, opening the first public school in a neighboring town. James studied law and became a circuit judge, riding throughout the region to dispense justice. All three children would later say they learned everything important from watching their parents. They learned that love was built on more than romance, that it required work and patience and choosing each other every day. They learned that a good marriage was a partnership of equals, each respecting and supporting the other's dreams. They learned that family was everything, that home wasn't just a place, but the people you loved and who loved you back. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch. All three children came with their own spouses and children. The house was packed to bursting, full of noise and laughter and love. That evening, after everyone had eaten and the grandchildren were finally settling down, William stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. 30 years ago, they stood in a church in Custer and promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. They've kept that promise every single day since. They've shown us what marriage should look like, what love really means. Thank you for being the example we all try to follow. Everyone raised their glasses, calling out congratulations and well wishes. Yates pulled Audrey close and kissed her, not caring that their children were watching, not caring about anything except this moment and this woman who had been his whole world for 3 decades. Later, when the house had finally quieted and they were alone in their room, Audrey stood at the window looking out at the meadow bathed in moonlight. Yates came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That day on the stage," Audrey said. "I was so sick, so scared, so uncertain about the future. If someone had told me then how everything would turn out, I wouldn't have believed it. This life we've built, this family, this love, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We built it together," Yates reminded her. "Every step of the way." "Yes," Audrey agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "Together, that's the secret, isn't it? We did it together." They held each other in the moonlight. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by circumstance and had chosen, every day since, to keep choosing each other. The fever that had brought Audrey to Yates's door was long forgotten, replaced by the warmth of a love that had proven stronger than any trial, sweeter than any dream. Years later, when they were quite old and their children would visit with grandchildren who now had children of their own, people would ask Yates and Audrey for the secret to their long, happy marriage. They'd look at each other and smile, and Yates would always say the same thing. "She arrived sick with fever, and I nursed her back to health. But the truth is, she healed me too. She healed all the lonely places in my heart and made my life full in ways I'd never imagined. Love isn't just about the grand gestures or the passionate moments, though we had plenty of those. It's about choosing to care for someone every day, in sickness and in health, just like we promised. It's about building something together that's bigger than either of you alone. And Audrey would add, it's about finding someone who sees you at your worst and stays anyway. Someone who believes in you, supports you, makes you laugh, and holds you when you cry. I found all that and more with Yates. He's been my partner, my best friend, my love, my home. Everything good in my life stems from that day I arrived in Custer. They lived to see the new century arrive, living into their 80s, remarkably healthy and still deeply devoted to each other. When Yates finally passed in his sleep one winter night in 1922, Audrey held his hand and whispered all the things she'd told him 1,000 times before. She followed him 6 months later, peacefully and without pain, and their children liked to think she simply couldn't bear to be without him for long. They were buried together on the hill above the meadow, overlooking the house they'd built and the valley they'd loved. The headstone reads simply, Yates Kendrick, 1857–1922, and Audrey Kendrick, 1857–1922. Beloved parents and grandparents, together forever, and in a way they were. Their love story became part of the family legend, passed down through generations. Their great-great-grandchildren would hear about how grandmother Audrey arrived sick on a stagecoach, and how grandfather Yates nursed her back to health and fell completely in love. They'd hear about the ranch, the teaching, the way two people from such different backgrounds built a life together against all odds. The house on the meadow remained in the family, carefully maintained and treasured. The cottonwood trees Yates had planted grew tall and strong. The creek still ran clear and cold. And on summer evenings, when the light turned golden and the mountains cast long shadows across the valley, it was easy to imagine a young couple sitting on the porch, holding hands, talking about their dreams, building a love that would last for all time. That was the gift Yates and Audrey left behind. Not just land or property or material wealth, though there was some of that too. They left the gift of showing what love could be when two people truly committed to each other. They showed that marriage wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. That family was everything. That the risks we take for love are the ones we never regret. From a moment of desperate need, when a sick young woman needed help and a lonely young man chose to give it, grew something beautiful and lasting. A love story that began with fever and fear became one of joy and fulfillment. Two strangers became partners, then lovers, then spouses, then parents, then grandparents, their lives so intertwined that neither could imagine existence without the other. In the end, perhaps that's what every great love story is about. Finding someone who makes you want to be better, braver, kinder. Finding someone who sees all of you, flaws and all, and loves you anyway. Finding someone who turns a house into a home, who makes ordinary days extraordinary simply by being there. Yates found all that when he lifted a feverish young woman from a stagecoach and decided to help her. And Audrey found it when she opened her eyes days later to see the face of the man who'd refused to let her die. Everything else, all the years of joy and love and family that followed, grew from that single moment of compassion and choice. And really, isn't that how all love stories begin? With one person seeing another and choosing to care, to help, to stay. With someone taking a risk, opening their heart, believing in possibility. Yates and Audrey's story was unique in its details but universal in its truth. Love transforms everything, heals everything, makes everything worthwhile. Their legacy lived on, not just in their descendants but in the example they set. Be kind to strangers. Take risks for love. Work hard at your marriage. Put family first. Never stop choosing each other. Build something that will last beyond your own lifetime. The ranch prospered through the decades under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren. The tutoring tradition Audrey started continued, with several of her descendants becoming teachers themselves. The values Yates and Audrey had lived by, hard work, honesty, compassion, love, were passed down carefully from generation to generation. And sometimes on quiet summer evenings, when the family gathered at the old ranch for reunions and celebrations, someone would tell the story again. How great-grandmother Audrey came to Montana Territory sick with fever. How great-grandfather Yates nursed her back to health and fell completely in love. How they built a life together that became the foundation for everything that came after. The young people would listen, perhaps skeptical that such deep love was really possible in an age of divorce and cynicism. But then they'd look around at the house built with love, the land tended with care, the family gathered together across generations, and they'd start to believe. Maybe that kind of love was possible. Maybe it was even worth striving for. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be inspired to take their own risks for love, to be brave enough to be vulnerable, to build their own lasting relationships. Maybe they'd remember that the greatest love stories aren't the ones that come easily, but the ones where two people choose each other every day, through every challenge, building something beautiful from simple beginnings. That was the real gift Yates and Audrey left behind. Not just a family or a ranch or a collection of memories, but proof that true love exists, that it's worth fighting for, worth working for, worth everything. That when you find it, you hold on to it with both hands and never let go. And so their story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the transforming power of love, to the beauty of commitment, to the joy of finding your person and building a life together. From fever and fear to health and happiness. From strangers to soulmates. From a single moment of compassion to a lifetime of love. That was how it began, and that was how it endured, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and lasting forever in the hearts of those who came after. The cowboy who nursed the sick young woman back to health and fell completely in love. The woman who found in that cowboy everything she'd ever needed and more than she'd ever dreamed. Together, always and forever, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. And if you visit that valley in Montana even now, if you stand in the meadow and look out over the land as the sun sets behind the mountains, you can almost feel it still. The love that transformed two lives and created something lasting. The promise they made and kept. The legacy they left behind. It's there in the wind through the cottonwoods, in the sound of the creek, in the very earth itself. A reminder that love, real love, never truly dies. It just goes on, touching lives across time, inspiring others to be brave enough to love that deeply themselves. The end, and also the beginning, because every great love story is both.